like, but let's go to master the tools. So let's go with Zoom.
Okay. No,
and moving further on. So if at the moment, if you've got some background noise, just mute yourselves. Just it stops me from muting you. If I mute you, then I can't unmute you. So if you can mute yourselves, it just makes it easier. I've hit record so that we can, for those who can't make it, and I might need to. So let me quickly, let me quickly mute everyone. If you then need to unmute yourself, if you want to ask a question, but we will give the opportunity later on. Okay, so quickly jumping into it, and let me just drop that one here. There's three basic conversations that I really want to have with you today. The first one really is, what is conversational capacity? What do I mean by this? And along the way, we're also going to explore about, why should I care? So what is it, and what does it really mean to me? The second thing we're also going to talk about is, why is it even an issue? If you think about it, it's, as human beings, as people, we're not naturally good as human beings to talk to each other on subjects which, let's say, on subjects which could be a little bit tense in a balanced, healthy way. We want to understand what gets in the way. So, we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then, lastly, I also want to talk about, how do we go about building conversational capacity, not only as individuals, but also with our teams. So that's kind of what we're going to look at. Very quick overview, high overview, some basics. And then what we're going to do at the end, we're going to have some Q&A at the end. But again, please, don't wait for the end. If you do have questions, please just drop them into the chat box. Would love to get your questions. We'll keep some Q&A time at the end. But if you've got questions, drop them in the chat box. Would love to start, seeing some of those and getting some information from you. Now, enough said of that. Let me just close that window. And straight up off the cuff, if you come to one of my talks before, it's interactive. You're not going to get away with just sitting there. I like to interact, speak to you, and get some information from you. And again, Zoom is, why you keep moving it down there? So I'm just going to, quickly jump that back, because I've got a poll for us to do, because I'd like to learn a little bit about and learn a little bit from you. So I'm going to start a poll quickly. And, the real question here is, as we look at today, as we are sitting here, which of these best describes you, and pick one of those and then hit submit. But I'd really love to know, you've come here and there's some things that you would definitely like to be getting to know more about. So, which of these, best describes your interest, your area of interest that you would like to explore. And I see some of them already coming in. So please, pick one. You can only pick one, I'm afraid. And then don't forget to hit submit. And then I'll give it a couple of seconds, and then we can quickly share that just so that everyone gets an idea. And then again, at the same time, I can also bring most of those into the conversation that we're going to have today. So we've got up to about last seconds. Anyone else wanting to drop anything in there? I'm about to quickly end the poll. Last ones, last takers. Go. Okay, end the poll. Let's quickly share that. Interesting enough, if you have a look at that, you should see the results. Yes, you can. So the majority, it's, we'd like to help our people, our teams to communicate better. So that's a really big one. That's really an important one that comes up. Again, I think we've got a good group here this morning, because we've associated, communication to problem solving, which is an important one. And then again, how do we have these balanced dialogues? So in the conversation, I'm certainly, in the course of the session I'm going to try and speak to all of those. If you've then, as I say, got some specific questions on any one of them, please drop it into the chat box. Would love to get them, or bring them up at the end, but the Q&A, but don't forget it. That's really the important one. Don't forget, that I want to have these questions, want to have these discussions with you. So let's quickly moving on, because I don't want to waste too much time. I've read this. I got a lot to share with you today, so I'm super excited. So let's talk about the first issue. We said, what is conversational capacity? And conversational capacity, there's many different ways to describe it. Probably a quick elevator pitch is something like conversational capacity refers to, the ability, and again, this can be as an individual or as a part of a team, but it's really the ability to engage in these open, balanced, non-defensive dialogues. And, it comes to really difficult subjects and, more importantly, in challenging circumstances, so that, as we can have, as we move into more difficult, more challenging problems that we may be trying to solve, or we've got these really big goals, as the US says, these audacious big goals out there that we either set for ourselves or set for our organizations. And also, again, because we've got so many people around the table, these are always diverse people, different people, and the bigger the differences, that can come into play. So that's an important one in there. And a question for you, and you can thumbs up, you can virtual, just think about it. I mean, in today's environment, yeah, we are 2021, 2020, 2021, COVID still in the mix. Is today's environment more challenging than it was a year ago? And you're probably all going to nod your head or inside going, yeah, it is more challenging. So, in my personal opinion, it's how do we get the opinions of the people that are sitting around the table on important, visible issues? How do we bring those up? Another way to think about, conversational capacity is a team with a high conversational capacity will have the ability to put, the most difficult, painful issues, topics that pretty much everyone around the table has got different opinions about, might even be well divided on, but yet at the same time, we can do good work around it. And I guess the opposite of that, a team with a low conversational capacity is going to be a team where the smallest difference derails the meeting. And you've probably all been in one or both of those meetings. So, you can be and have the smartest people around the table in a room, whether it's virtually. You can have absolutely the best product, the best service, that killer strategy in place. You can have all the resources that your team and your business needs, at its disposal to use. But if the conversational capacity of the team, of the group, is missing, then, or maybe the key relationships within the group, if that's too low, the team is going to underperform, and that's kind of the foundational of what I say conversational capacity. Is getting tongue-tied here, but that's the sense. I mean, it's about how do we construct open, balanced, non-defensive communication dialogue. That's really the idea, because that's really what a team needs to do. And it's just, a different way of thinking about it. Maybe another way to think about it, and it's one that we do in our training, and we go into a little bit more detail in it during the workshop, because we always take a little bit of time to explain it. But, and you're right, just close your eyes for a second. Whatever you're doing, just close your eyes. Imagine yourself, you're going into a meeting sometime tomorrow. So there you are, sitting in the meeting. Close your eyes. Could be virtually, could be face-to-face if you're lucky enough. You've got all of these smart people around the room. And on tomorrow's agenda is you're going to make, there's an issue, and you're going to make a really important, really a big decision. It's one of those big decisions, has to be made at that meeting. And again, you and your colleagues are all sitting around the table. You're going to discuss this issue. And at that moment in time, the place you're going to want to be working from is what I would describe the sweet spot. That's where you're going to want to be working. Now you can open your eyes again, but you've got all those people. You want to be in the sweet spot, because it's that sweet spot is that place in a meeting or in a conversation when things are really open, they balanced, there's learning focused. That's the sweet spot. The sweet spot is in a meeting where you don't just have the smartest people around the table, which we obviously all are, but we actually get full access to our abilities, to our smartness. That's the real thing. And again, you can have the right people around the table, but it doesn't always work. So that's why I've seen so many leaders that, focus on the first thing. They focus on getting the right people, having the smart people around the table, but don't focus too much on how do we create that working environment where, the circumstances can be difficult, can even be against you because of whatever's going on in the environment today, but you can still get access to the ability of the people that's on that table, and I say to the executives I work with, if you can't do that, then, well, that's really not very smart. So I believe, being in the sweet spot is where smart people are working smart. We're getting the best out of it. So, that's where the question should now move on to is, okay, well, what makes the sweet spot such a useful place? How do we get this in there? What are the fundamentals of it? And the sweet spot I really see as there are two critical elements to it. On the one hand, you're going to have candor. And people say, okay, candor, candor. Another word for candor: honesty, forthright, direct. In a candor situation, in a meeting, you are not wondering, what do my colleagues around the table think about this issue? There's absolute clarity on everyone's position on the issue and topic we're talking about. That's candor. Candor, really useful, really robust. But again, if there's only candor in a conversation, that can also drag us and go sideways quickly, and it's not always good, too much candor. So candor is usually balanced, on the other hand, with curiosity. Curiosity are people that are open-minded. They're inquisitive, eager to learn when one of your colleagues has a different perspective on something. Rather than, let's get defensive and upset. Let's rather get interested. You could be in a meeting where you go, wow, I love my idea. It makes perfect sense to me from where I'm sitting from. On the other hand, and I'm going to pick on someone up in the top right-hand corner. Thomas is saying that he doesn't agree. He doesn't find it the same thing in it. I wonder, what am I missing? What is Thomas seeing that I'm not seeing in this situation? And that's one way to be looking at. And that's where, then the good work starts to happen. It's when individuals, that are sitting around the table stay in that sweet spot between, candor and curiosity, that's where the real magic, the work happens. But, unfortunately, we all tend to fall out of it either one way or the other because we let go of the candor or we let go of the curiosity side of it. And, that can be difficult. If you think about it, if I let go in a meeting of, let's say, the candor, or what is going to happen? You're going to quite quickly see me leaving the sweet spot. So I'm going to become, as we said, more guarded, more protective, cautious. You've probably seen people react in this way, where they're sitting in a meeting, big grin and smile on their face, and they're not saying what they need to say, but they big smiling and but not saying a word which they really should be saying. So that's, they've gone out of the sweet spot on the candor side. On the other hand, if you're in a meeting and you let go of curiosity, you go in a different direction. People become more arrogant. People become more argumentative. And the ugly reality is quite often when my brain switches off and is still speaking, not a pretty picture when that happens. Brain is off, mouth is still going. It doesn't really help anyone. So I would say, conversational capacity, again, we can almost define it as the ability to stay in the sweet spot, both mixed between candor and curiosity, but importantly, under pressure. And I think that's really important, for us as leaders, for leadership, because it's hard for us to ask our teams to do the work that we're asked them to do if we are flying in and out of the sweet spot on a regular basis. I think a key aspect of any leadership is building the ability of our team to work together effectively when it really, really counts. So if you think of effective leadership, then there's really a lot of work to do around the area of making sure that, the conversations we have or the conversations I have, that I can behave in a way that is going to help my team to bring their A game, because that's what we want. We want their A game. We want their best game to come to work. I mean, I used to work for an organization where, believe it or not, we went out and we said, we hire the best people, which we did. Great people. Then our culture was, when you arrive at the office, leave your brains at the door. How smart is that? Not very smart. But you want to create that environment where people bring their best to the office, their best ideas, best innovation, best of everything. And and that's where people around the table, we've got to be able to harness that individual differences. So that's kind of another way to think about it from this perspective I see. And how do we know when conversational capacity is lacking? How do we know when it's missing in a meeting or a relationship? And again, this is not just business. I mean, this is a skill that you can use even with your wife, with your kids. But when do you find that it's lacking in a relationship, a meeting, or a business? And there's usually two primary symptoms. The first one, you're going to go, well, yeah, candor's missing and curiosity is missing. And it's like, yeah, very, very true. But, the real symptoms of when candor is missing, you're often going to find undiscussable issues. What does that mean? Well, projects, goals, strategies might not be moving as forward as fast as they could or should be. You've probably all been in a meeting when, you step out of the meeting, you think back of it, you go, the most useful part of that meeting was the coffee break we had. Has anyone been in that kind of a situation where you go like, waste of time? We've all been there, but, undiscussable issues, come out of that. And that's one classic sign that some work needs to be done. On the other hand, you turn that around, you say, well, okay, you might hear people, what about, this one I've seen so often in my past life, where corporate company, multifunctional matrix organization, and you're at the meeting, getting your coffee before you walked into a meeting. This was before we had all the virtual meetings, but same thing, same situation in the virtual meetings. Before the meeting, you're at the coffee machine and one of your colleagues says to you, are you going to bring that issue up today? And you go, no. Are you? And he goes, no. You have that sort of conversations. Those are classic signs, because there's more information than it's likely that issue is going to come up at the coffee machine than during the meeting for various reasons. Another sign that conversational capacity is missing, or, that maybe the lack of curiosity is not there, is what about issues that are discussed but are not productive? So, these are what I call unproductive or discussable issues. They get brought up, but yet when they get discussed, there's a little bit of egos come out, different positions, some head-butting, a little bit of arguing. And, those kind of conversations are the one where you go, it brings more heat, more fire out of this conversation than actually light on what we should be doing. So there again, we are leaving the sweet spot one way or another. And you tend to see more of these symptoms. So, this is what you need to be watching for in your teams, in your meetings. You've got to ask yourself, when are we not having the conversations that we need to be having? And, and when are we having those conversations, but they're not serving us well? So those are really the two symptoms in there. And, what does a future, a bright one? I mean, earlier, I asked the poll and everyone said, yeah, we want to help our teams communicate, innovation, effectiveness. So what does a bright future look like, when a lot of communication is happening? But before you even look at the future, is what is getting in the way of making that happen with the team's performance today, especially when the pressure is on? In this environment we're in with lockdown, the market's changing, there's so much going on, the pressure is on. So what gets in the way? And, what impacts our conversational capacity? So quickly changing gears a little bit, and sure, you're going to say, well, okay, of course, candor, curiosity, that gets in the way. And yeah, you're right. It's not a complicated thing, but why is it an issue? Where we said earlier, we're not naturally good at staying in the sweet spot. And, I believe this of all of you, we are smart people, we care, We have good intentions. We want to do our best. So why would this be an issue at all? I mean, we come from the right place. Why is it a problem? And it's really, simplistic, or, it's a simple concept. When you think about, curiosity, candor, it's a simple concept. But the reality turns out that in practice, it's extremely difficult to maintain that balance, especially under pressure. Where we all sort of are wired, and we get triggered out of that sweet spot in different circumstances. And it's those circumstances that we probably need to be more in the sweet spot. I mean, if you think about it this way, easy place to stay in the sweet spot. Think about a topic where no one really cares, not very important. Yeah, it's easy to stay in the sweet spot of that discussion. Turn that around. Pick a topic where we're all really passionate about, a lot of information riding on it, big decision that needs to be done, really something important. Now staying in that sweet spot becomes more difficult. So that's really part of the discipline, is to learn, how do we stay in that sweet spot more consistently, as well as more intentionally? Because, we need to learn how to recognize that, emotions, very powerful, and powerful emotional reactions will definitely drag us out one way or another. It's going to take you out one way or another. So how do we become more intentional despite all of that? One thing that I can't do for you, and I wish I could, is I can't stop you. And maybe I don't wish on this, because it would take away from life. I can't stop you from being emotionally triggered. I can't. It's a big one, but I can't do it. So, and especially when you go into meetings and conversation, that issue is going to come up. It happens to every one of us. It's going to come up for the rest of your lives. Well, we're not going to solve that one. It's not going to go away. But what we can do is, become increasingly competent, so that we can realize when we're being emotionally triggered, catch it, and hold on to it. Because catching it is quickly, understanding I'm being pulled out of it, I'm being triggered. But if we can catch it, we can remain more rational and have more conscious choices, and we can respond in a more rational way, which is going to lead to better thinking. So, but that's where the real gym, the heavy weights come in, because, that's where the practice comes in. And conversational capacity can, some people have said it's an operational, emotional, intelligent way of thinking. And I think, that's not a bad description of it, because in a way, I am doing a better job of, managing and monitoring my own emotional reactions under pressure, but I'm also monitoring and checking on the reactions of the others around. And when I notice, that someone around the table is starting to shut down, or I notice that someone around the table is going to start responding in a heated way, and they're going to pull back, then, at least I can ask questions to bring them back into the sweet spot. So that's really what I want to share with you is, these emotional reactions that cause us so much trouble. And there's really one, and it's a very simplistic one. And it's human nature. Human nature is the problem. Staying candid, staying curious. If you think about it, it's like, that's a pretty logical way of communicating. But then these things that of our emotional reactions, our human nature, that we're all born with, it's our emotional makeup that makes us human beings. Well, this actually gets in the way, and there is a cost associated to it. And when you think about it, the cost in an organization. This was a recent research study done by Gardner. I think 15,000 people globally, and 50% of those 15,000 employees reported that, they missed, and this is the important part, a significant or an important key company objective of goal because of poor communication. Then another part of it, they came out and said that 77% of employees, the people, again, that they were, studying in the survey, said that poor communication hindered the company's ability to compete. So, which is interesting. So my question to you is, and you don't need to answer it, but, just answer it for yourself in the back of your head. What is poor communication costing your business? what is poor communication costing your business? And then that's an interesting one. And I just want to quickly jump to a next one. I've got another poll for everyone. So let me flash up the second poll, poll number 2. Launch the poll. Yes, I want to launch the poll. Yes, the poll is up. So, my question to you, and this is, you can choose more than one of these. Which of these issues, would you say is caused by poor communication? And there's quite a long list. I haven't included all the things. I put some in that I could think of, whether it was poor decision making in the time of a crisis, or does it slow down, and the problem solving, and scroll down there. There's a lot more. If you have the last one where you see other, then please drop in other. But also at the same time, would love to hear what that other is in the chat box. And while you quickly do that, give you a quick second, have a quick sip of water. Oh, and I see I've got something. Hey, Marcel, good to see you on the call. And I love your comment. Yes, mainly due to no clear agenda, outcomes. I love that comment.
Yeah, that was a reaction on an earlier statement you had, an earlier slide.
Yeah.
So.
No, I thought so, but no, thank you on that one. But it's good to see you, and it's good to have you on. So last couple of seconds, and then I'll quickly end the poll, and I'll share that with you. And, and this is going to be interesting. I'm hoping you're going to, okay, let's end it. Let's share it. Hope you're going to find this as interesting as I am, because, when you look at it, the first one, poor decision making, then, yeah, again, it's the problem solving side. But when you look at, and you scroll down the list, there's pretty much every single one of those are caused by, poor communication. If you have any others, that I haven't thought of, we would love to, drop them in the chat box. We would love to have them in there. But it's certainly interesting that, it does play an important part. And, just think about it this way. So, imagine if people throughout your organization could communicate better, could engage in effective conversations, dialogues about any topic. They could talk to pretty much anyone about almost anything, no matter who they were, whether it was the CEO or, the customer service person speaking to customers, what would happen? What would you see? And I'd love to hear a couple of your thoughts, and I'll get rid of the sharing on that, but I'd love you to drop that into the chat box. If everyone was communicating better and effectively, with everyone else in the organization, what would some of the things that you would see? What would happen? And please drop that into the chat box. Would love to hear some of your thoughts. One that comes to mind, for me is projects would move forward. They would certainly move forward more faster because, I've seen, again, coming out of a corporate environment, Stefanos is speaking with a purpose. Marcella says results would be, more forthcoming. And Marcella, you and I worked for the same company for many years. And, some of what I'm speaking about, we've seen there, others we've seen in different environments. But yeah, you think about it, in any matrix organization, any organization where you've got, and you're connecting with different teams and you're speaking to people, suddenly if poor communication is going on, projects go very slowly. Timelines get dragged out. Results just don't happen. So absolutely, projects would move forward much, much faster. Thomas, thank you, says poor synergy between foreign branches of our company. Absolutely. Different parts of the organization, not quite aligned, not working as well. Yeah, and, talking about results, absolutely. Goals would be met much, much faster. Teams would perform at much higher levels, regardless of, how much pressure was on from the environment or from customers. Jonathan, good to see you. Big misunderstandings if we don't communicate. Yes, very, very much so. Limited solutions, slow problem solving, most definitely. Those are all associated with poor communication. What if, and even if our teams communicated effectively, would they act more fairly and more constructively? I would think yes, and again, another thing that we tend to see is, that teams and people would thrive, would love to work together, because at the end of the day, how many of you here, and you can be honest, we've all been in lockdown, how many are you missing face-to-face conversations? I know I am, but as human beings, we want to connect. We want to speak to other people. So absolutely, people, teams would thrive. Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. Me too, and Marcelo. Yeah, we want to work together with other people. We want to make smarter decisions. We want to find best solutions. I don't believe there's one person in any organization that on his way to the office or his virtual office, as he walks into wherever his computer is going, how can I really turn this into a bad day and make bad decisions and slow things up and cause problems? No one wants that. Everyone's going with the best intentions. But again, something that is simple, we usually know what we need to do, but very seldom do we do what we know. And that's where, the critical part of that comes in there. So let me just quickly drop that one out. Let's just see if the slides are going to move again. Perfect. So, where we said that human nature is the problem here. So staying candid, staying curious, it's logical. We kind of like, yeah, that sounds logical. We know that human reactions get in the way. And yeah, it's the human nature we were born with. It's the human makeup we have. And that really gets in the way. And there's not much we can do about it. So we got to get some things to be able to change. But before we can change, again, the two emotional reactions that we're always being influenced by, and there's two of them. And, the first one, when I look at it, for those of you who know, let me share a quick example. For those of you who know, I'm from South Africa. So I was born and grew up in Johannesburg, South Africa. And this was an incident that really happened. Back in primary school, so I can't remember, we must have been about 10, 11 years old. And one day, my best friend who lived across the road from me, we were playing football, soccer as the South Africans say, football as the Europeans say. And we were on the playground, we were playing soccer, football, and my friend falls down and hurts himself. And there was a group of kids which were older than both, my friend and I, and they started making fun of him. They started teasing him, calling him names, and just picture that for a moment, So there I am. I want to run, and help my friend. Those were my clearest intentions. I wanted to, here's my friend. I care about him. I wanted to get down on my hands and knees, help my friend up and speak up against those kids which were giving him a hard time. That was my intention. Very simple. One, I wanted to help out. Two, I wanted to speak up. Pretty straightforward. I don't think, in life, it rarely do we get handed such a neat problem where there's like two solutions, easy to fix. But there it is. So my clearest intentions, I run over to help my friend. I get there and I just froze in my tracks. And, I froze in my tracks, and it was, as a kid, I didn't know what happened. All I know is I wanted to do something, but I couldn't. And I'm like, what's wrong with me? On the other hand, when I look back at it today, I realized, yeah, I did have good intentions. Absolutely. I wanted to help out. I wanted to speak up, but there were some deeper intentions in me, like watch out and shut up, and watch out and shut up actually won out. And, it was an emotional reaction that was triggered in me, even though my intentions were good. So what really happened in that situation, in that circumstance, it was my need to minimize the circumstances, the negative emotions, the tension, the discomfort, the risk. And, when I react and to minimizing, it kind of shows, and it shows up, and it can put a really big distance between, what I am doing and what my intentions are and what we'll end up doing. So, there I'm standing on the playground watching my friend suffer. And yeah, there is really a big gap between what my intentions were and what I did. Now, it's not that I'm a bad person or that I was stupid, but my emotional reactions just got in the way. got in and made me go in an opposite direction to my good intentions. So, one of the emotional reactions that throws us off is this need to minimize. And when we get triggered by it, believe it or not, it shows up in very predictable ways. I mean, the first one you're going to say, well, okay, that side of it, candor must disappear. Yeah, absolutely. Candor does go down. But, some of the things that you will definitely see is, there's going to be fraying agreement in there. People start to sugarcoat their points of views. They start to ease them into the conversation. Sometimes they will even cover up their point of view completely. That's happened. And then they bring them up at the coffee machine, but not in the meeting. Or they also withdraw totally from the conversation. We've seen that, where people just, they're in the meeting physically, but mentally they are totally somewhere else. Don't know where they are, but they're not in that meeting. So that's, just, those couple of things there is just a short list. But in essence, the need to minimize, that behavior, that pattern, it's because we go for what is easy. We go for it's comfortable, it's safe, at the expense of what is really needed and necessary. So, the one thing that, you need to manage, I need to manage, is to manage and monitor our own behavior, as we said, but also to look around the table for your colleagues. Where are they not sharing their point of view? Where is the tendency where they might be moving out of the sweet spot? They're not focusing on how do we learn together? How do we work together? Just think about it. We've all heard some of these unfortunately, these examples I'm going to give you, where nurses are not speaking up in a surgery when they see a surgeon who's about to operate on the wrong leg. I've seen that's happened to my dad. Luckily, it wasn't his leg, was his thumb. He walked out of the operation having the operation on his wrong thumb. Another one is, what about a co-pilot on the flight deck, in the cockpit of an airplane, when he doesn't speak up, when he sees the captain about to make a serious mistake? And that need to minimize, it's not a minor tendency. I mean, the reason that has so much force behind it is it's a manifestation of our fight or flight response, which is really something deep-seated in us. It's in our minds, when we perceive something that is not a threat as a real threat. That can have a lot of force, a lot of power on us, and really drag us and pull us out of the sweet spot in, unfortunately, disturbing ways. But it's not only that it's a tendency, but it's one of the problems. But it's not the only problem. I mean, if we flip the chart over, we'll see that the other chart, the other problem that I've got, and I recently got to work with a local company, educational company, won't mention names. They were an international group of schools. And I was doing a session with them, and one of the gentlemen on the team, behind his back, they gave him a nickname. So you might associate with this example, but they gave him a nickname. To his colleagues, behind his back, he was called the human flamethrower, the human flamethrower. And in that workshop, he was very outspoken. And, he also explained why he was outspoken. He says, when he was growing up, religion, politics, any sort of sensitive topic issue was normal to be discussed and argued over at the dinner table. And he says, in my family, if you weren't arguing, says my mom would assume you weren't feeling well. She would say, literally, are you okay? You're not screaming and fighting with your sister on this topic. He says, I thought it was normal, he thought. I grew up with it. And it was only when I reached, I got older and I started to bring some friends over for dinner that my friends would leave the house and they would never want to come back again. The reason was because the conversations were heated, argumentative, and there was just so much conflict, even though it was, done from a very early age. So, he says, I grew up in an environment that, I went to school, I went to work, and that was a very comfortable behavior pattern for him. You can imagine when he's in a meeting, suddenly he disagrees with a colleague during that meeting, and guess what? All of that dinner table training, man, that shoots straight back. And, he would argue right back with them. If anyone was disagreeing with him, he would shut them down. So, in a meeting, when he gets triggered, he doesn't get triggered to go and minimize. He gets triggered by the other side. The other side is, he gets triggered by the need to win, the need to get his own way, sell his idea to the group that, they must adapt his perspective. They got to run with it because to him, that was an important one. Think about it, a definition of, when you think of winning, by definition, there's nothing wrong with winning in life, whether you're playing football or tennis or cards or chess. I think those kind of things, winning makes fun. It makes life's journey interesting. If you've got goals and you can achieve them and exceed them, that's great. Winning is needed. But on the other hand, when it comes to conversations, winning can be rather counterproductive, if I can put it that way, because, we lose. We can turn those conversations into lose-lose, or we start to play this zero-sum game where I win, you have to lose. And, that certainly doesn't help with the curiosity side, because we see that the curiosity side goes down very quickly as we move out of the sweet spot in that respect. And again, even with, when we pull out of the win side, there's some very predictable behaviors that go with it, and these are behaviors that you've probably seen around the table, so you start to see that, people are not listening to anyone else. They're not really asking questions about views that they don't agree with. In fact, quite often, and I've seen this in more meetings than I care to remember, where, the person starts to roll his eyes and shake his head and goes, yeah, or whatever. He's just dismissing your idea. He's not actually inquiring. On the other hand, people can also be far more aggressive. And I've seen this too, where they start to pull rank, where a manager might go to his team and say, look, here's the organization chart. This is how it's going to work. This is how it's going to play out. Get on and do it. And again, that does not necessarily work. And quite often, we can even use our own expertise in an area as a form of rank. Let me give you an example. As I said, I worked in a manufacturing company, very, very strong engineering. So you can imagine when an engineer says to one of his colleagues, because the engineer's been there for many years, one of the top engineers, and he says to you, Roberto, I have forgotten more about stress analysis on brakes than you're ever going to know. So let me tell you what I think, what we should do, and how we are going to do this. I almost kind of felt the last piece missing out was him going, and you're welcome, by the way, I'm going to solve your whole problem that goes with it. But that's not the way I certainly felt inside. So, in that way, you're not encouraging and calling in on views of your colleagues in that meeting, and that's where it becomes a problem, and this is, again, it's just really a short list of things that you see. But when we allow ourselves to be pulled out of the sweet spot on the win side, as we said, curiosity goes down and these behaviors tend to show up. So these are some of the things that we absolutely need to be watching out for, and quite often, and we both, the good or the bad news, we both do both of those. Because quite often when we do these workshops, someone will say, I am a minimizer, or I am a winner and I have this need to win and get my own way, and that's the way it is. In reality is, it's not like there's one way or the other. In reality, we both do both. It's just a fine line between, again, that fight and flight response. So the interesting questions here really are the ones we should be asking ourselves is, under what circumstances do I let my need to minimize get in the way of my effectiveness? Now, think about that. How does my need to minimize get in the way of my effectiveness? Now, that's one question we should be asking ourselves. A second one that goes with that is, under what circumstances do I let my need to win get in the way? Now, if you ask yourself those two questions and you write an answer out, all of us have to answer those two questions individually. It's going to be different for every single one of us because there's so many different complex variables in there, and they're all interrelated and interdependent. And it's your personality. It's who you are, how you react. So everyone is going to be different. But two really, really important questions in there. Now, when I think about it, what are some of the triggers that can set us off? And one of the ones that comes to my mind, being South African, is cultural background. I mean, we spoke about personality, but cultural background to me can make a big difference. I grew up in South Africa, so one of my tendencies either to win or to minimize could be stronger than if I'd grown up in Switzerland. So someone in Italy will probably be different to someone in Japan. So culture is an important one in there. And again, also, how do we feel about a certain issue in there? Again, we said, how passionate am I? If I'm not passionate, I'm probably not going to get pulled out of it. The more passionate I am, and you just got to think about, those of you who love football teams or a sports team and you follow those, what happens when you meet your rivals? It's those sort of conversations, but these are real life business decisions we're talking about. So, how do I feel about the issue at hand? Another one is, the behavior of others and authority, but also authority, if I think about it, is really a big one, because wherever you're sitting on the organization chart, and if you are talking up the channel or you're talking down the chain, that's might certainly influence how strongly I care about the issue, and also about the behavior of, and about how you care about it. The behavior of others, absolutely, we see that all the time. Or, our physical and mental state. When you think about it, we're in lockdown. It's really easy to get tired of the situation. It's easy to get stressed out. You can feel frustrated, and that can trigger my behavior. Or, you've been working from home for such a long time and you've had enough. Or back in the old days when we were allowed to travel, you've just traveled, you've come back from, a long trip, time zone differences. And it's one of those trips where, your emotional reactivity might be a little bit higher because you're just absolutely drained and tired. So your mental state can also play another one. And also expectations, because, quite often, maybe I'm going to have a conversation with Leszek this afternoon. And because of my last conversation with him, I think Leszek's going to get, defensive about this topic. Sorry, Leszek, just picking on you. But you're going to get defensive about this topic. So, my expectation, he's going to get defensive. That's going to trigger an emotional reaction in me before I even have the conversation with Leszek this afternoon. So, you can do, and I can do a really good job of really getting in my own way when it comes to staying in that sweet spot, because we're our first, best, worst own enemy. So, another one that we often see that triggers us out is being respected, or even feeling or looking stupid. This again gets in the way. And, we can go on with this list. So, some of the things that we do talk about in the program is how do we get better at catching it, catching what's triggering us, so that we spend less and less time, out of the sweet spot and more time in there. So, we in the program, we talk about catch it, name it, and tame it. Because, catch it in terms of I've identified it, name it, let's give it a name, and then let's get this animal or beast under control, if I can put it that way. So, there's always this need to minimize, and there's always this need to win, again, depending on the situation. So, the disciplines in here is, if you can catch it, if you can name it, if you can tame it, you're now going to start to have more emotional discipline than someone in a meeting who doesn't do that, And one of the practices we talk about in the program is trigger journaling. So we actually start paying attention to situations that, trigger us, so that we can get better at catching it, better at naming it, better at taming it. And that's an art that we really need to practice, But firstly, we got to get aware of it, so that, once you're aware of it, you can start to watch for it and the implications it's going to have. And that's really conversational capacity. In concept, it's again, really, really simple, but in practice, more challenging. So again, it takes some work, it takes some practice to become emotionally aware of ourselves, as well as the people in the meeting around us. And again, as I say, and that's where the practice is. So, another part of that, is, how do we bring that awareness beyond ourselves to other people. And one of the skills that we talk about in the training is mindset, because mindset, think of it this way, if I'm in a meeting and I notice I start to have that need to minimize again, because I might be a minimizer on this specific topic. So, suddenly I'm aware of, there it is again. So the next thing I want to do is quickly refocus, onto what really matters. So we talk about, in conversational capacity, in the mindset, and that's kind of like the conversational North Star, if I can pull. So you've always got something to aim for and something to head to. And that's, it's something that is, you've got to get genuinely, you've got to make it more important than me just feeling comfortable or me feeling, I have to be right. It's like, what is the big picture? How do I keep that in mind? And then, I need the ability to be able to minimize, catch the minimize, pivot quickly so on to what is really important and, what really matters. And it's that, it's got to be part of, the learning. That's going to be a core value. And I think, if you think about it more clearly, the ultimate goal is really about how do we make the smartest choices? How do we move forward on this topic, this issue faster? I may feel less comfortable, but it's going to be a better solution for everyone around us. And then the question comes, is that a price that I'm willing to pay? Because I'm going to feel uncomfortable, and absolutely, quite often, I don't know if you guys have been in, if you've managed teams, you're in a situation and guess what? You don't have all the answers. You don't have it all figured out. And that's okay too. But then do we have the ability to bring in that conversation so that all of us are smarter than just the one of us? Because that's really about learning. And that's really about, creating that conversational capacity, that situation for it. So it's an important one, because all of us have got different perspectives. And it's not just about tolerating different perspectives, because, diversity is a fantastic thing. I mean, Marcella and I worked in a company where in our Zurich office, believe it or not, we had 39 different mother tongues. We were only an office of 70 people. I can't remember the number of nationalities we had, but diversity was a big thing. Now, the question is, how do we make that diversity become a strength? Marcella says around 15 people. Excellent. So, but it was a huge amount. But yeah, these personal differences are an important one. And we need to know how to use those and exploit those, because that's an important one. So personal differences, also some of us tend to be very optimistic. That's me. I'm an optimistic person. So quite often I can downplay risk, and I need to, no problem, Jonathan, giving me the thumbs up. Yeah, being optimistic, but I downplay risk. So do I check in with my colleagues who are maybe not as optimistic as me and try and understand, what are they picking up from this situation? What are some of the risk factors that maybe I'm not paying attention to? That's how we then have to have this mindset. We want to learn. So, and that can be done in various ways, and I mean, if you look at organizations, it's happened over. I mean, yeah, I've been in organizations for many years, in the automotive industry for over 20, and quite often, if you're in a company for a number of years and suddenly a new person shows up, and they've got different ideas, different ways of thinking. They see things with fresher eyes. Now, am I the kind of person who's willing to engage that or not? I mean, think about it. You could be, there could be functional differences in organizations where you might have a very strong sales and marketing background, which I do have. So I tend to look at everything through that lens. But, would I sit back and go, I wonder what this decision would look like through the lens of an operations person or through a finance person? What do they think about this? So, you've always got to have that culture of always wondering, who might have a different perspective? What might that perspective teach me around this area? Now, it's not about just getting my way. It's about learning. So, how do we make better decisions with our eyes, wide open, seeing as much as possible? So we have to have the mindset, and that's going to be a hunger for learning. so that we can make smarter choices by getting everyone's perspective, all of the diversity, all of the differences, and bringing in those in. And here's there's a number of different quotes in there that that highlight this, but one that I did find and absolutely love this quote. Well, sorry, I didn't go through on this. So yeah, learning smarter choices, leaning into the differences we spoke about. But what I wanted to talk about was, this quote. And there's a great quote by William Shatner. Probably most of you have heard or know of him. And, he was doing an interview with Esquire magazine a couple of years ago. And what he said was, we meet aliens every day who have something to give us. They come in the form of people with different opinions. Now, to me, this is so great because, we think about it, the person on the other side of the table, the other side of the screen in the meeting we're in, is different. He could be different, he could be foreign, he could be alien, but he's got a different perspective, and that difference of perspective is more likely in me to spark that, wow, aha moment. I've just figured something out that I didn't realize before, which is also going to give me, a more exhilarating, fulfilling experience of the meeting we're having, but it's going to help me to learn. It's going to give me that, I never thought of it that way. I get the point. It makes a lot of sense that way. So that's an important one is, how do we look at things and try and get everyone's different perspectives in there? And that's an important one. So, it's a good one to have. And, when you think about it, and yeah, actually I do have another quote. I mean, for most of you who know Ken Blanchard, he's one of my mentors. Got to meet him last year. Great guy. I've read most of his books, and I absolutely love Ken. And this is one of Ken's quotes. And he says, "None of us is as smart as all of us." And I absolutely love it because it's another way of thinking about this. If I'm sitting in this meeting on this call with just my view of the world, and the decision I'm going to make is not going to be as smart or as informed if I bring all of the people together and we collaboratively work together, think this through, and we become smarter. So that's kind of how I would describe conversational capacity as a framework, because it's sparking that collaborative learning in team situations, so that when we the whole room becomes smarter because of the way we are communicating, the way we are working, and we get better results out of it. Jonathan, I'll tell you later my favorite book by Ken, but it's a good one. So again, it's how do we create that? And that's really, again, part of the mindset, catching it, naming it, taming it, pivoting quickly, moving back onto what really really matters. Learning is about getting smarter. So then we can look at the perspectives, we see the important differences, we see the diversity, and that's a strong value in mindset. And the more diverse the team, the higher the learning opportunity, the higher the learning potential. And that's part of the skills that we need is to have and use this diversity. So diversity around the table is something that needs to be included and not excluded from conversations. It's really pull together the best parts, pull together that diversity, different ideas on decisions, on trying to solve the problem. How do we make these changes in the organization so that in a way that we make sure we, one, get it right, and we're not leaving the diversity on the table, because it's so easy to appreciate it, but put it aside and often forget about how we can be more diversely inclusive and be more disciplined about it in that way. So I'm going to have a quick sip, and then we'll have a quick look at the 3 skills. If there are any questions, just please drop them into the chat box. We'd love to start pulling them out. Just going to have a quick sip. A couple of more slides. So, when we look at it, the skill set there are really 3 domains, and, it's what needs to be practiced, what needs to be cultivated. And, first, we've got to get aware, we've got to get the mindset that some of these skills I need to strengthen in order for me to do a better job. And I've got to stay more candid. I've got to stay more curious if I'm going to stay in that sweet spot. But, there are 2 candor skills in here and 2 curiosity skills, and they really both balance each other out. And in the meeting, let me give you an example of, one way to help stay in a sweet spot. So, it can get very technical in different parts of it. But, one way to, think about it this way, one way to use the candor skills, because they are structured in a very streamlined process. How do we go about doing a more efficient job of getting an idea out of our heads, through our mouths, during a meeting, in the middle of a discussion, a decision, which can be, sometimes tense. So, we do need a structure to be candor. And, this is where the skills come in and play an important one. People quite often in a meeting are sitting around the table and are stating clearly their position on, how they feel about this issue or decision that's about to be made. But what I mean by this behavior is having the ability to clearly state where you're coming from on that, on that issue in one sentence, no more than two, in one sentence. So, if you can do that, even if it's, writing it down, if you're doing it virtually, but, construct a top sentence, a good paragraph construction sentence where, you putting out your position. So it's letting people know where you're coming from. And that can be from a fixed perspective in terms of sentences and words, but, absolutely, we've got to be able to get our position across, and if you think of it, I think we could, an example of this might be, we're in the middle of merger and acquisition time in the automotive industry, and someone in the team might go, or you might go, I think we should hold off another acquisition for at least 6 more months. Bang, you've been very precise. Everyone around the table knows exactly where you stand on making another acquisition in this case. But also it could be a little bit less, concrete, where someone on the team might say, I think, there's at least 2 ways we could go about addressing this issue. And to be honest, I'm really not sure which one is the right one. Now all of a sudden the position is clear that the person who's just made that statement, there's a fork in the road, there's a decision to be made, and they're not sure which road to take. And you could even make it more emotional than that, because, you might add on by saying, I have to be honest, this decision scares me. Again, very clear position in there. So, statements of, where we are right now on this, situation, and then that's an important one. And we can see that, the person might be nervous. Again, there's implications, there's impacts on these 2 different forks, these 2 different roads that might be taken. So it's an important one, and when you think about it, conversational capacity, it's really about, again, we said the first skill in there is, creating positioning. The second one is really about thinking. So, and this is not thinking in terms of, just getting the idea out of your head, but it's related to the experience we had earlier, when you go back to, when I was at school and it didn't quite work out the way I did. But think about it, you might have been at school, and who remembers doing maths, doing long division in class? Anyone remember doing long division in class? I mean, for the younger guys, we used to use green boards, not blackboards, even though they were called blackboards, doing long division, and you always had to show, you couldn't just give the teacher, Jonathan says some time ago, but when you were doing the maths, you always had to show you're working out. You couldn't just give the teacher the answer, because if you did that, you didn't get the full mark for that answer. You had to show you're working out. And in the conversation, it is no different, because again, you've got to say, okay, this is my position, but this is also why I'm thinking that. Your thinking is always described around certain elements. How did I get to that position? And it's along the elements of, what evidence do I hold, or what data do I have, or is it based on experience, or is it just, based on some vacuumless data, which that's the way I feel. So, you go back to the M&A acquisition example. So let's say, we were to hold off the acquisition for 6 months. A question might be, or you might be saying, okay, let's hold off the acquisition for 6 months. The reason I have for that, what leads me to think that is, it's research, it's an experience, whatever it is, and that's how I get to my perspective. and that's an important one. So it's really about the thinking. The second part of the thinking is, how do we make sense of the evidence? That also becomes really critical. How do we interpret it? Because often, and you've probably all heard of this. You get two eyewitnesses that have witnessed a car accident at a traffic light. Police go to interview them, and two totally different stories. They've both witnessed the same thing. They've had the exact same data, and yet are arriving at very different conclusions. So, we also need to know how to make these informed suggestions, if you can put it that way, because, when you're looking at a big business opportunity, you're optimistic on the team, you love the idea, and someone else is pessimistic and hates the idea. So what is the difference in their position? One hates it, one loves it. Perfect. Now is to understand, why should we do it, or why should we not do it? Now we start looking at the evidence. We start looking at some of the information behind it. And again, we can weigh these variables differently, but it's an important one to look at. So how do we get better at putting our view on the table and then explaining it in a way that makes sense of the information, so that people can see our train of reasoning, so that, it's got to be a little bit more structured. It's not just about candor, but it's really about being more structured. And I think with that, again, there's two behaviors in there which we need to be more consistent at, whenever we're in a meeting. When we're meeting up, we've got to use these two, because if we do them properly, it makes a big difference. Otherwise, what tends to happen is you go to a meeting and you've got two or three people who kind of play communication ping pong, and no communication and no decisions get made. We just land up playing ping pong, throw ideas around, and walk out of there, and no one's any better than it. So, the two on the other side, the two curiosity skills, and the next one is also really big. It's a big one, because, and I think we should spend more time in that. But in the workshop we go into a lot of detail on it, and it's an important one, because once you've put your view on the table and you've explained it, then we've got to do something unusual. We actually got to show how we are holding our current perspective, our current idea, how we're holding it, if we want people to be open and engage with us. And what I mean by that, we've got to help other people to improve their thinking, because what we don't want to do is give people the signal that, we've got our position, this is how it is, and it's not up for debate. You've really got to invite that in, and you've got to show them that you're kind of holding your perspective more as a scientific experiment, as a hypothesis, where we're going to test this. This is what I'm thinking, this is why I'm thinking it, but I haven't decided yet on it. So, we've got to look at it in different ways. Let's see how we can do it. And that's really about, starting to test it. So test it is really a key part, because, it's putting our assumptions forward, explaining it, and then we test it. Now, when in testing, again, you're testing your view, your point of view of the world, and there's lots of different examples. Some are formal, some are more casual. Maybe you're working closely with a close colleague that you've worked with and known for many years. So let's say I was doing a project with Marcelo, because I've known Marcelo for many years. Marcelo and I probably would have no problem in challenging each other in a meeting. And that might just be a casual test, where we put the issue on the table, you explain it, you ask questions, what is your take on it? What do you think? Do you do it? Don't you do it? Do you see things differently? That's one casual way to do it. But you can also imagine a different scenario where a CEO is running a meeting, and let's be different. It's a lady CEO, so she's running a meeting, and in the meeting, the subject, there's a subject matter expert. So it could be an engineer, but there's a subject matter expert, and the expert is new to the company. And also, by the way, not just being new, happens to be 2 levels below on the org chart, lower than the CEO. So the CEO puts her idea on the table. She explains it really, really well, then turns to the subject matter expert, who, again, we said is new to the company and 2 levels lower than her, and says, what do you think about this? Now, all of a sudden, the subject matter expert is starting to struggle a bit, because he's now like, well, do I have the tendency to minimize things? Or am I going to kick this pretty hard right now? Because again, this is her boss, 2 levels above her, and as we saw, she just laid down her position very clearly. She gave some very good reasons. And again, this person might be, as we said, is very new to the organization. So those are some good reasons of like, I'm new to the organization. I'm 2 levels below the CEO. The CEOs put their position across. Good thinking, good rationale. I'm not going to say anything. It happens very quickly. So if the CEO wanted to help that person and overcome their tendency to minimize, they got to bring them into the conversation. If they want to really test their hypothesis. So one way to do that, one way to think about that is you could be going and saying, you've explained it out, and you say, well, this is my position, and from where I see it, it makes perfect sense to me. But I must be honest, I'm not quite sure, or it scares me, who is seeing this differently than I am. Now, all of a sudden, you're inviting that in. I was recently, in another example, I was recently talking to, again, an aftermarket organization, automotive, where the CEO, and I took my hat off to him because he put his idea on the table, described exactly to his engineering team what they wanted. He basically said to them, look, here is the issue we have. Here's the background. I'm going to walk out of this room. I'm going to get out of your way. I'm going to leave you alone for 30 minutes in this room. And when I come back, up on the chart, on the flip chart, I want at least 3 reasons, 3 things of why this is a bad idea, why it won't work. And I don't want anyone to agree with me. I want at least 3 ideas of why this can't work. Now, all of a sudden, what has he done? He's laid out his position. He's laid out his thinking of why he's doing it. He's put it in there as like, I'm only testing it, but he's inquiring. And the inquiring is the important part, because that can also take us off track quite quickly. And then I've seen it before. So, quite often what happens if you're the manager, the leader of a team, if you enter the room with your team, suddenly their candor and curiosity goes down, unfortunately, because of your position power that you have in it. So that's, it's an important one. And you don't want to be squashing that around. So basically, in this case, the CEO gave the engineering team, the room and the space that they needed. He was not going to squash any ideas. He wanted to bring out the best in them, because, then he says, I want the biggest concerns, and we're going to go through every single one of them. And I want people's ideas. I want their concerns. I want to hear them. So he comes from a genuine part in this. So, in the meeting, we are not actively, passively acting and going, well, let's hope that this idea or this meeting turns out the way we want it. No, what we got to do is become more proactive in there and be proactive. We put our position, put our thinking forward, testing it, but certainly we got to inquire on it. Again, as I said, inquire on, the hypotheses. What do you think about it? Are you okay with this? Get those different things out there. And, what really happens is that, changes in 3 particular ways, especially in the virtual environment. Last week we were doing some virtual training, and, let's say on a Zoom or a Microsoft Teams call, you suddenly realize that one of your important colleagues on the call is not really contributing. So you might inquire to them, you might invite them and say, hey, Roberto, we've been talking through this topic for several minutes now, and with everything that you've heard, I would love to know, what is your take on it? What do you think of this? That's some of the things that we can say to bring people and get them into the conversation. Again, it's not about my opinion, and, it's not always about explaining, but again, you can always use the inquiry method in very different ways. Again, you've got to bring people into the conversation. So it's not just my decision, it becomes a primary decision of the team. My goal for you for this webinar is to help you build your conversational capacity, so that, in every conversation, every meeting that you have, because you were in the room, the room is smarter than what it was before. So it's not necessarily only that, you want to show up there as the, Albert Einstein with intellect, but the room becomes brighter because of what you've been able to do. And it might or might not be your brilliance, I don't know, but it's really about getting people to participate in conversations. And that's really how we elevate the level of dialogue, so that, you're in a room and the room is smarter than if you weren't there. And that's an important one to get for the entire team. And certainly that will increase, performance, because we're going to have shared concepts, shared language, shared skills on how we can go about working together when something is significant. It's on the table, it's important. It kind of gives us some ground rules of how we can talk to each other when something is critical or, at stake. And, again, it's that awareness to be able to catch it, name it, and tame it, and bring that in there. So, I am talking a lot, and I've still got a couple of more slides, so bear with me, a couple of more slides. But, that's really the core idea of, the 3 areas that we look at and practice in conversational capacity. Now, a couple of things, and then we'll open up to the Q&A. When I refer to conversational capacity, it's kind of, I don't know if anyone's did martial arts. I used to do karate when I was much younger, but it's a conversational martial arts. And, there's always a risk when I say that, because, when you frame it up as a martial art, then someone thinks, oh, yeah, great, I'm going to use this against my team, my colleagues, and my boss. And that's not the thought. Conversational capacity, the art, the opponent is not the people we're talking to. It's never the issue we're trying to address. It's never the context in which, is before us. It's not the people, it's not the context, it's not the issue. It's an important one. So we've got to work in that sweet spot to keep it in there, but it's never the issue that we are trying to address in there. Because, as I said, our opponent is not the context. It's not the issue that's before us. It's something different. And it's usually our emotions that we've got to keep in mind. How do we stay candid? How do we stay curious in there? And for those of you who are looking at that, when you focus on staying in the sweet spot and you focus on the learning side, then conversational capacity has the ability, for us as individuals, for us as teams, to stay more purpose-driven, keep our egos in check or under control. And, if we want to stay in the sweet spots, we've got to focus on learning. So, yeah, ego. And that's what we're going to take to the mat. The opponent is really our egos, getting ourselves out of the way, because, as leaders, we've got to be direct, but we've also got to be better managers, better leaders. And if we want to be better, to lead our teams better, our teammates, our colleagues, be better influencers, then we've got to be better human beings, less driven by our human nature, our emotional programming, that ego that gets in the way, that drives us out of our purpose, out of candor, out of curiosity. We've got to take the courage. We've also got to be humility. We've got to be humble in some ways, because, you've got to get your ego out of it. And it takes courage when, you're in a meeting and you put your hand up and you speak out. That's an act of courage, especially when you're coming from a perspective of, trying to do the right thing for the organization. But again, we've got to balance all of that with, the candor, the courage, humility, in order to be effective. And again, these are all different aspects of our character, cultivated over the years as they've grown. So conversational capacity is really a discipline, and it's keeping us, keeping our passion, keeping our ego a little bit in check and under control, so we can really focus on what is the issue at hand, what is the best solution that we really need to find. And with that, you will see that, as we said, conversational capacity is really, the foundational competence in there. But what we do talk about, in the program is, because it takes a lot of practice, but there are 3 very, very critical questions that we always need to be asking, and the first one is, what am I seeing that maybe other people, are missing? Is it better for me to speak up? Otherwise, someone might miss on a learning experience or might miss on something. Now, that's the first question. Second question we need to ask is, what are other people seeing that I am missing? Do I have a blind spot? Am I, the optimistic person? And that's going to help me and you to stay more curious, more open-minded, so that we can listen to someone who sees things differently. And, the last question is, what are we all missing? What is the team's blind spot? What is it, that's going to really keep us curious together? Because, we're always looking for a better way to think, a better way to work, a better way to do things, and also we should ask, what, we might have an issue and go, okay, what are our competitors? How are they dealing with this issue? And what can we learn from them? Or, can we learn from something different, other organizations, different industries? If you think about it, we mentioned nurses not speaking up. And that's why today, if you look at it, surgical teams in hospitals are now using checklists, and checklists were borrowed from the aviation industry, so they took a look outside of their own industry for a better solution. And they've borrowed this checklist protocol from aviation. And I think aviation has been using checklists since World War II, but that's to help, surgery, surgeons, nurses improve their performance. So, what are we all missing can be a powerful question that we should be asking. Absolutely should be asking ourselves and everyone around us. So just quickly, just want to run through the last couple of things. There's 3 domains that we need to practice. The first one is the awareness, so people need to switch on their radar, recognize that, we have this fight or flight reaction, our emotions, which is going to stop us and prevent us from listening. It's going to create discomfort in others, in ourselves, but at the same time, it's also going to allow for more intentional responses to challenging conversations. So that's, the first practice we need to look at. The second one is the mindset. People need a new mindset. We have to have positive intentions during conversations. Again, it's not about winning. It's not about proving I'm right and the others are wrong, or just about, I'm going to play it safe. It's about exploring the diverse perspectives, listening to contrasting views, because, the greatest opportunities and insights and growth lie in that area. And the last one in there is, the skill set. The skill set, people need to learn from 4 simple behaviors. And again, the behaviors there were, positioning, thinking, testing, the inquiring, again, on the 2 sides. That's the essentials of conversational capacity. Those are the ones that build genuine candor. Those 2 are the ones that go and build curiosity. And then when we start to balance candor and curiosity, now we're sitting in absolutely the sweet spot. So in said that, I know I've said so much. I do want to open it up for our Q&A, because I say, we're running out. I do want to take some questions. So just before I do open it up for a Q&A, I just quickly want to run one last poll for you, just so that I can get, if some of you might be looking for some additional information, I might not be able to answer all your questions. One last quick poll, other resources. If you thought what I've said is interesting and you're looking for some articles or some ebooks on the topic, or you want to join our next webinar, or maybe you want more information on the module or the training program, where we do run these both for individuals as open groups as well as for closed complete teams. So if there's anything in there, just drop them into select one, select more of those. I won't share that with anyone, but it's just for me to get some feedback on there. And because then I would absolutely love to open up to the Q&A. So hopefully you got your questions and your answers ready. Otherwise, you can drop them into the chat box, because I really certainly want to get to all of your questions, because I think this is such a powerful and important topic. So let me quickly end the poll on that one. And let me stop the sharing, and I go to bring, oops, that one's kind of moved around. So, yep, okay. Now I've got everyone back on view. And if you have a question, I'm going to say, please unmute yourself or drop it into the chat box. Would absolutely love to answer any of the questions you may have. So I see we got a question from Leszek. Thanks, Leszek. Building trust beforehand, help you communicate. This time we need a quick one, and how this is going to be. Building trust, yeah, absolutely. And Lesha gets a good question because
But that was a reaction to the before question, because not every time, not if you scroll up the chat, you will see that sometimes there is no time for this kind of nice decision-making process. And that was my reaction, not a question.
True. But I mean, just with what you mentioned there about trust, and I was just thinking trust beforehand, because quite often people go, well, okay, where does trust and the conversation fall in? And that's kind of like the chicken and the egg situation, because which one comes first? Do you need trust before you can have good conversations, or you need good conversations before you can have trust? And, I think you absolutely need a little bit of trust so that you can start this new structure of trying to have more constructive, more conversational capacity. Because if you do that, that will certainly increase the trust. That was just a thought based on what you had said. So yeah, any questions from anyone? Would love to answer those. And Jonathan, my favorite book from Ken is going to be The 1 Minute Manager. That's probably the first one I read many years ago. And since then, I've loved his concepts.
What is the name? Sorry.
1 Minute Manager.
1 Minute Manager. Okay, thanks, Robert.
I've got it on there. It's literally, it's a thin book. It's maybe like 100 pages, but it's powerful in concept.
Okay, great. Thanks.
And, again, opening it up, any questions? If you've got a question, I ask you to unmute yourself, or please, drop it into the chat box. I see some comments. Davide, thank you for your comment. Maya's got one. What we need to do when one person is fixed on his opinion? That's a Maya, excellent question, because quite often we've put the position in and we are really fixed on it. And, there it's just a matter of, from our side, if it's the person sitting across the table from you, is you use the inquiry. So you start to ask, okay, you fixed, you don't need to say the words "you fixed" in your position, but it's like, okay, I understand that's your position. And if you want, you can ask them to explain a little bit more of their thinking behind it and their rationale. That's one way. And then trying to, along with that, trying to bring in other people's different concepts. Because again, if it's a meeting around the table and one person is going, oh, we've got to go that way, and that's the only way they want to go, but the rest of the group is seeing it that way, then the question, you can ask whoever's wanting to go one way and say, well, okay, you've got your position, you've got your thinking, this is what everyone else thinks and sees, their rationale behind it. And then you can try and explore that conversation, because you're never going to force a person. Again, it also depends if that happens to be a boss, because if it's your boss, it becomes more difficult to do. But I would certainly say, explore their position, explore their thinking by inquiring. So you can, again, as we said, it's a martial art. So there's to and fro between curiosity and candor. So you can be honest, asking, how did you get to that position? And inquire, and as soon as I think, when people around the table are able to give their perspectives, you might not, if I'm just putting myself in the shoes of the person who wants to be very fixed, I might not openly go, okay, I see everyone else sees it differently. Maybe it's wrong. I might be the person where I go to end the meeting, go away and think about it, because I've seen this happen. You go to the next meeting and the person's totally changed his direction, but it's been based on what were you able to influence? So again, the position, the thinking by the inquiring. And again, it's holding on to our position more as let's test it, let's see, not as I want it to go this way. Because, think about it. Even your GPS in the car does this. Destination, wherever, I've got to get to point A. But if there's a roadblock, or, I don't know, a tree fell over because of the storm, well, all your GPS is going to, I'm going to reroute. So there's different ways. And it's just a matter of how do we get as many different ways, explore them onto the table. And the only way we do that is by inviting people in. But you've got to make them feel safe. Hopefully that answers your question, Maya. But it was really a great question. Thank you. Any other questions from anyone? Because I'd love to answer some of your questions. I know we're just running over time, but okay. I will stay here. I mean, if you've got some personal questions, I will stay here as long as, as long as you are here. So for the next 5-10 minutes.
You have one question from me, which is on
Yes,
the chat.
please.
What is the first step in a situation when the team is frozen in bad habits, like literally for years? How to get moving towards better?
Good question. When the team is frozen, now it would be good to understand a little bit of, the reasoning behind
like
why
it is since like 10 years. People are get used into the situation, they adapted, but then just accepting this is a no-go. How is it even possible to change?
Absolutely, it's possible to change, but I think that's more of probably of a foundational cultural thing where that's been created. So we got to change the culture, and in order for that, it's going to come from the top down, where the leaders of the organization need to want to be open to change, and then you can have it could be as simple as having the conversation of, guys, look, we've done this for the last 10 years like this. I do apologize. I've messed up. I see what it's created to the team. I see the damage it's done. I'm sorry. I would like to change it. How do we go about changing this together? But that's got to be a mindset. Someone's got to want to change. And the people are not going to change unless, the culture and the leaders want to change. And they've got to drive it. It might be tough because you might, as a leader, you might need to go, guys, I got this wrong. I messed up. What I've done has not helped. Sorry, I would like to change it. But I think that would be the first place to start, but it's more cultural then. Any other thoughts, questions from anyone? Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. No, in that case, I can, if there's no questions, I can only say thank you to everyone. I've really enjoyed this session. I hope it's given you something of value, something that you can take away immediately and start applying in your next meeting today, tomorrow, virtually, face-to-face. But, and on that, I actually want to share one last final thought. And my slide has disappeared. There it is. So, one final thought for today. I mean, if you walk away and don't take anything other than what I'm about to say to you now is, an organization is a community of communication. Communication is everything that we do in life, business, family, friends, it's everything. And as leaders, it's really about how do we shape the nature of that communication. So, if you think of it in this way, each one of us has the ability to influence every conversation, every meeting. And how can we be more responsible and take more responsibility for improving the quality of those conversations, of those dialogues, and it could be, when there's a major issue on the table that needs to be addressed, but it can also be with our families, our friends, our communities, or in the organization. We all have a role to play. So, if you take nothing out other than this, I want you to take this thought with you. What role can I play in every conversation to make it smarter than what it would have been if I wasn't there? Let me repeat that. What role can I play in every conversation to make it smarter than what it would have been if I wasn't there? Think about that. And if that's all you take out of today, then, I thank you for being on the call. But, in that case, I just want to say thank you to everyone. I've appreciated your input, your intake, always enjoyed it. And I will be sending you out, some ebooks, some invites, etc., as per your requests. Guys, thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you all again next time. Have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon. And for those of you from the US, have a good rest of the day. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone. Hey, Bart, I didn't see you on there. I think you're on mute. Ciao Mattia, ci sei ancora? Let me ask to unmute. This one.